In 1979, only 2 years after the release of Star Wars, and with the American interest in sci-fi at its highest since the 50s, a movie would release that would eventually be known as the quintessential science fiction horror film. Directed by Ridley Scott and starring Sigourney Weaver, that film is, of course, Alien. A movie that holds up to this day and continues to get sequels, video games, and toys. Some of them equally as celebrated, and others about as enjoyable as a proctology exam from Edward Scissorhands. But then, in 1996, a mere 17 years later, a new entry into the sci-fi horror genre would hit the scene, in the form of a PlayStation video game called Resident Evil. A game that would go on to become one of the highest grossing video game series of all time, with movies, video game sequels, and toys. Some of them equally as celebrated, with others also probably about as enjoyable as a proctology exam from Edward Scissorhands. So, yeah, we're getting to those similarities pretty early. But in this video, I'm going to focus on the first story in each franchise. Welcome back to Words of Paradise, I'm your host Leon Idle, and with the Resident Evil series being my favorite video game franchise of all time, and Alien being one of my top 5 favorite movies ever made, I think it's about time we get down to the burning question. Did Resident Evil rip off Alien? We're going to get into the dead meat of that in this discussion today, but before we do, go ahead and hit that subscribe button because I'm trying to get to 2,000 subscribers before the end of the year, and with just 300 or less more to go, then that's looking real doable, so I'd appreciate if you hit that button. I usually do nerdy news every day, but this is my first Halloween special comparing one of the horror greats of film to the horror greats of video games, and what might be more similar than you think. But enough of me, let's get into the analysis, shall we? On the surface, you wouldn't think the two would have much in common. I mean, yeah, they're both sci-fi horror, and you can maybe make the argument they both have a female lead, assuming you choose Jill instead of Chris at the beginning of the game, and that's where the similarities end, right? How can they be more similar than that? I mean, one stars a group of cops, while the other a group of space truckers. One takes place in a derelict mansion as opposed to space, and of course you have hordes of zombies rather than a singular extraterrestrial threat. But I noticed, these stories have far more similarities than differences when you actually get into the weeds of it. By the way, big shout out to Cannoli Sasquatch and Vex Electronica on their Mischief Mayhem Movies livestream. They're actually the ones who helped me realize this when I was a guest on their show doing an Alien review. So by all means, check them out, hit the subscribe button. They cover great movies every Monday, and sometimes you get to see yours truly as a part of it. Anyway, as it turns out, the plots to these are remarkably similar. Almost too similar. Let's start with Alien. You have a crew aboard a spaceship, Nostromo, which is effectively an interstellar 18-wheeler. I mean, yeah, these guys are quite literally space truckers, just average folk. Alien isn't Interstellar or The Martian. The crew, while technically astronauts by definition, aren't scientific explorers like we think of, but rather just individuals that exist in a world where at this point, traveling through space is common for work. They're the epitome of the everyman archetype, and they stop along their trip home after receiving a distress signal, with one crew member, Ash, saying his protocol to assist those sending these sorts of signals. Remember Ash, because he's going to come up and be really important later, but for now, you know the rest. The Nostromo crew find the ship who sent the distress call, destroyed, abandoned, and infested with xenomorph eggs. One crew member gets attacked by a baby xenomorph, eventually turning him into a human jack-in-the-box. And boom, the first victim dies. We have the trope of the everyman struggling to survive in a horror situation against a monster that outclasses them in every way in a cramped, disorganized, and well-worn piece of real estate. And now, jumping on over to Resident Evil 17 years later, you have the STARS members, the Special Tactics and Rescue Service, basically the SWAT unit for the Raccoon City Police Force. Not quite the everyman archetype on the surface, but that is actually the intent from the writing perspective as the game goes on. STARS is on a distress call mission to find other fellow missing officers, and they set down their chopper in a forest after finding the wreckage of their comrade's own helicopter. Not unlike how the Nostromo sets down to land while searching for the missing people who sent the original distress call, and one officer, Joseph, named as a tribute to Joseph Joestar, by the way, holds no meaning to this comparison, but just some fun trivia for my fellow weebs out there, gets attacked and mauled by a zombie dog, leaving the remaining STARS members to take refuge in a nearby mansion, where they are, you guessed it, struggling to survive in a horror situation against monsters that outclass them in every way in a cramped, disorganized, and well-worn piece of real estate. Alright, so the initial setup may be the same, but that's all there is to it, right? Like, your boy Leon's jumping to conclusions. Well, hold on, baby birds, hold on. Papa Leon's still taking you through it. Sit down, listen to the story. We'll go get some ice cream afterwards. Let's talk about the antagonist of the story. I mean, yeah, obviously you have the titular alien in the film, and hordes of various monsters from zombies to infected sharks, giant snakes, etc. in the game. But those are more obstacles than antagonists. They aren't really characters with goals and motivations of their own, simply there for scare factor and to give our heroes something to fight against and be in danger of. No. The real antagonists are the Weyland-Yutani Corporation and the Umbrella Corporation, respectively, as well as a couple of lackeys that we'll get to in a moment, but here's a brief description of the Weyland's business from Xenopedia. Weyland-Yutani was primarily a technology supplier, manufacturing synthetics, starships, and computers for a wide range of industrial and commercial clients, making them a household name. The company also had numerous non-manufacturing interests. So, the kind of corporation that a certain politician would probably have his son get in bed with to take major payouts behind the scenes. Uncomfortable truths aside, let's take a gander at the Umbrella Corporation, using the Resident Evil wiki for consistency. Umbrella had influence in the production and sale of cosmetics, chemicals, pharmaceuticals, industrial machine production, consumer products, health foods, the transportation industry, and tourism. Umbrella's large array of subsidiaries was typical for large-scale corporations, though it was purposely built to cover up illegal activities. So, business as usual for large conglomerations like this. But not only do they do incredibly similar business to the front-facing public, the behind-the-scenes aspect of these corporations is also pretty much the same. According to Weyland-Yutani employee Carl Bishop Weyland, one of the company's primary goals behind capturing the xenomorphs and creating weapons out of their biology is to ensure humanity remains the elite species in the universe, and not just because of profits. Uh-oh, why does this sound familiar? Soon after the opening of its pharmaceutical subsidiary, Umbrella Pharmaceuticals, Umbrella began developing biological weapons for militaries across the world as part of a worldwide conspiracy to accumulate deadly viruses directly prohibited by the 1972 Biological Weapons Convention. Umbrella Pharmaceuticals was able to cover their true intentions by researching vaccines for the same viruses as a front, and Dr. Fauci would be so proud. And there we have yet another similarity between Alien and Resident Evil. The antagonists are evil, faceless, multi-billion-dollar corporations viewing human life as expendable in their goal to create bioweapons for military use. Now, whether these bioweapons be done through using xenomorph DNA or creating undead monsters that can keep shambling through a battlefield after going from human to Swiss cheese after projectile-based negotiations, it doesn't really matter, and it doesn't end there. To further these similarities even more, Weyland and Umbrella both set up the respective cast of the stories. With Weyland, you find out they knew before the events of the film of the xenomorph and intentionally sent the crew on a mission that would end with them bringing the creature on board, as they wanted it for a scientific sample and, if necessary, to gather combat data should things go awry with the crew. Needless to say, we have an Alien movie, so yeah, things go awry with the crew. We see this exact same scenario play out in Resident Evil, with the STARS members taking refuge in the BOW-filled mansion as all a part of a corporate plan to get combat data on their experiments against trained officers, as well as for a sample to be taken of their ultimate creation, the Tyrant. So far, I've listed 2 examples of almost identical plot points in these sci-fi horror stories.
The evidence is mounting. Although 2 times hardly establishes a pattern. I'd feel more comfortable raising the alarm if I were a little more certain.
Now, remember how I told you to remember Ash? No, not that Ash, the bad Ash, this Ash. Well, this Ash is far from the Shire, and he's the sole reason things go from bad to worse. A mild-mannered science officer on the Nostromo, seemingly harmless if not a bit suspicious as time goes on, the man turns out to be an android. Mandroid? Let's go with Mandroid.
You working for the Mandroid?
We're not working for the Mandroid.
You shut up! I ain't talking to you, I don't like you!
The Mandroid had a secret mission from Weyland, to bring back the xenomorph sample above all else, including betraying his crew and letting them die if need be. A true traitor to the team. And if you're a Resident Evil fan, you know exactly what's coming next. Albert Wesker, one of the most iconic video game villains of all time. The captain of the STARS team, the man who would lead them into the mansion to take refuge in the first place, a captain remaining calm, cool, and collected under all circumstances, and a man who always wears sunglasses even inside in the dark. And I want to say this should be a dead giveaway that this means he's the bad guy, but Blade and the Matrix kind of blow holes in that logic. Regardless, yes, this man was secretly a researcher for Umbrella the whole time, betraying his team to get combat data and samples of experiments. And I will say, Resident Evil does do a bit of a twist here that Alien doesn't do. Rather than Wesker doing this for Umbrella, he's actually turning on them as well and getting this data instead for a rival pharmaceutical company who he plans to sell it to and in turn take a position on the board of. But at the end of the day, the principle is the same. Each large corporation has a traitor on the team working behind the scenes to get what they want and work against their unsuspecting allies in the process. And to tie it up in a nice neat little bow for y'all, after the similar plot, story progression, location ambiance, and villains, they even both end the same way. In fact, they end with Michael Bay's ultimate fetish, an explosion. A self-destruction to be exact. With Ripley's final attempt to destroy the Xenomorph, she sets the Nostromo to self-destruct and gets in the escape shuttle, getting clear of the blast at the last second in true Hollywood fashion. And on the reverse side, the surviving STARS members do the same, setting the lab beneath the mansion to self-destruct and being picked up by helicopter flying away from the explosion at the last second in true Alien fashion. And there you have it. There's all the similarities I cared to detail in my analysis of the two, and honestly, there's probably even more, but do we really need to look into it any further? I guess I only got one question left. Do you think Resident Evil ripped off Alien? Because as for me, I honestly don't know. Clearly, there's no denying they are very similar. Again, thematically, story-wise, even in some instances, character-wise. And add to that, Resident Evil was made to be a very cinematic game for its time, being one of the first to use as much voice acting as it did, as well as set the game up in a way that used static camera angles just like watching a movie. The obvious inspiration behind much of the game isn't necessarily Alien, but George A. Romero's Of the Dead series. But beyond how the game depicts the ghoulish monstrosities, what else does it really have in common with his work? However, I also have my doubts about Resident Evil being a ripoff. For one, multiple people worked on the script, and there's no mention anywhere that I could find about Alien being an influence on the game's development. And the script itself was reworked many times in the 2 years the game was being developed, with the director even going so far as to say he had little interest in a long, complex storyline, seeing a story as only better than nothing. Now, it could just be coincidence. They did state they want a simple story, and, the simpler you keep things, the more likely you are to be similar to something else. However, it is worth noting that the international release of Alien, Japan is the country where the movie did the best, ranking in almost $17 million. That's about 4 times more than the second place international region, which was France, at almost $5 million. So, Alien clearly was massive in Japan by comparison, and considering Resident Evil is a Japanese game, it does make you wonder. So you tell me, do you think Resident Evil ripped off Alien? Let me know in the comments down below, or let me know on X, where you can find me at BoltTheWord. And please do subscribe. I am a nerdy news channel. I cover nerdy news every day. I don't typically do scripted long-form videos like this, but I do them about once a month because I do think it's a good way to get new and alternate versions of what I like to do on YouTube out to you guys. But if nerdy news is your angle, whether it be about video games, movies, comic books, Magic the Gathering, you name it, you can subscribe to the channel and you'll see it nearly daily alongside live streams and all sorts of other goodies. But until next time, it's all here in the Nerdosphere, and this has been Words of Paradise.